welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every single week through news and headlines ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and today we have, from the Exiles Network, Millennial Mike in the co-host chair. Welcome back, Millennial Mike.
Hey, just talking about before the podcast how I felt like this has been more than 4 weeks, hasn't it? I feel like I've missed my opportunity. You know, I feel like you forgot about me. But I'm glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Always happy to have you back, and everyone else, of course. But if this is your very first podcast, the very first episode of The Reasons I'm Broke, the way we format the show is most of it is news, which does cover comics, movies, video games, a lot of DC. Today we'll have a lot of TV and film talk. We will then move on over into this month's What's New on HBO Max, which are the June 2022 highlights, and then we end it with the Brokept Block, which is what Millennial Mike and I have been doing since you last heard us. It's the part of the podcast where you get to know us a little bit better. So let's jump right in and explore sector number 511. Got some gaming news here, as in an interview with the Kiwi Talks podcast, Retro Studios' Eric Kozlowski revealed how video game rumors can be frustrating for developers. He said, quote, "Sometimes it's frustrating because it creates false expectations. And I think that happened when we announced Tropical Freeze. You know, everyone was like, they're working on a Zelda game. But like, nope. And we announced Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, and it looks phenomenal, and it's gorgeous looking, and then people are like, oh, but it's another Donkey Kong," end quote. I mean, that is kind of the landscape we live in now, right? Where people will take guesses at what developers are working on. It's not like in the 90s where you and I would hear about video games when it was in the store. Like there was no hype or any kind of social media.
I read this before the podcast and I was thinking about it hard because that's a really good question. I mean, it's something that we've talked about probably before. I mean, it's something that we've talked about many times. It's something that we've been aware of and have had to deal with multiple times. This is certainly not the first instance of a situation like this. I would say that it's a good thing that we have some knowledge of what's coming out, like transparency, being like, you know, in tune and up to date is a good thing in some ways because it gives us the ability to give more immediate feedback. And in a lot of ways, it's good for the studios and the developers to have that more immediate feedback so that they can make better changes and quicker changes and whatnot. At the same time, it certainly is a double-edged sword because fans become very entitled as well. So it's really hard to say if it's really a good or a bad thing. I don't think it's either. I think in general, it's just how we, the fans, use that power and kind of the cultural elements behind our entitlement and whatnot, and why we think that, you know, another Donkey Kong game, like for instance, like were the fans right? Like because while it might be kind of disappointing for these developers here, the Retro Studios, do we really want another Donkey Kong game? It's like, and if they had listened to the fans earlier, would that be better for everybody? Would that be better for them? How many people actually bought the Donkey Kong game? Are they getting paid the way they expect? Those are the expectations that they should care about most. So, yeah.
You're right. It does create that sense of entitlement with gamers. We're seeing that a lot with also in the movie world. We're seeing it in just the world of entertainment. And it's both a good and a bad thing. I think everything has its pros and cons. I think now they are a little bit more fingers on the pulse with what gamers think, with what people kind of expect out of certain products. And yeah, it can, however, we talked about it last week, Maceo and I, of how, for example, Mass Effect Andromeda got absolutely murdered before it released because of a meme. And that really hurt sales. I think it really did cost them millions of dollars. And it's such a sensitive era now because Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze could have just been announced, like if it were coming out in the 90s, of here it is, it's out, oh cool, another sequel. But now it's this disappointing thing of, well, I don't really want to play that. I wish they had done another Zelda. We could have used another Zelda by now. Retro could have done another Metroid. I remember that one was another one because they have worked on Metroid in the past. Why aren't they working on Metroid instead of Donkey Kong?
Yeah, no, that's a big one. I personally just had to forget that Metroid even exists because I was really excited for Prime 4 And then they came out with that Metro Prime Federation Force. Remember that? And then they came out with Metroid Dread, and I didn't care about that either. And we're still waiting on they said they were going to delay Metroid Prime 4. And then in the meantime, we've been getting all these other different games. So I just feel like I've been really getting neglected, and Metroid in general has been getting neglected, while other franchises have been getting just milked. So I think, yeah, for sure, it is very frustrating. Ultimately, like, fans are always going to be excited when they think they're getting what they want. So even if it was like announced early, but it was what they wanted, they'd still feel like catered to. So you could actually use this preemptive news cycle that people are getting to actually dredge up hype for things and make the anticipation greater. So that is actually, it's not like a one-way street. Like, they can definitely take advantage of it.
In case you do want to check out Tropical Freeze, it is available on the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. Something came out of this Winnie the Pooh sort of copyright release, and it's a good thing. I'm kind of happy because a lot of Disney people are losing their shit over it, and that's always a fun thing to read about and watch all the tweets and the little meltdowns. Director Rice Frake Waterfield released images to Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, which is an upcoming horror picture. Something like Blood and Honey does not need Disney's approval since they no longer have the exclusive rights to the original Winnie the Pooh novels. Now, as Scott did say on his stream, another host of the show, that they do still own the copyrights to the red shirt Winnie the Pooh, that particular design, but the character himself, it is completely free. Anyone can you and I could make a Winnie the Pooh podcast and make money on it completely. And I think we could actually read the books if we wanted to right here on the show and not worry about any kind of copyright anything. I think all of that is free games or free to do. But the copyright lasted 95 years. It is now in the public domain. We did not get a trailer for all of this, but the the images to the film do look pretty fucking haunting. They do look really creepy.
Yeah, the film, it's kind of schlocky. It's not super duper schlocky. It's not like, it actually, there was a few good shots in there. From what I heard from an interview that I read, the creator's like, hey, it's going to be a low budget film, so don't expect anything like super crazy or whatever. And they're actually going to be trying to fast track the movie because of the news and how it's really been blowing up. They want to kind of capitalize on the hype that people are getting because of just all the events and how they transpired and whatnot. So yeah, no, it looks cool. And on the subject of Disney losing properties, that's always a good thing. I mean, out of all the properties that they lose, Winnie the Pooh is certainly not really a big loss. So anyone who's really like mourning it needs to just wake up, but no, it looks pretty cool. I'm excited that, potentially not even just this particular movie, but in the future, other people can make movies that are maybe perhaps more like the original book or add their own spin on them or create like really new creative stories with this franchise. So I'm really excited about the prospect of this going back to the public domain.
And to anyone, because I have seen those comments on comicbook.com of this is a travesty. This movie is ruining Winnie the Pooh, and it should not be allowed. And I hope Disney gets the rights back. That was one of the comments I read. I hope they get the rights back. It's like, no, this is done.
Yeah, I've heard that so many times. Like,
yes, we have.
You watch anything, man, I hope Disney gets the rights back. As though they've owned everything at one point. We've all strained so far from Disney. We've fallen from the grace of Disney.
And that's what's funny about it is, that if Disney were to come out with a Winnie the Pooh animated movie next year, those same fans are still going to go and support and watch that Winnie the Pooh thing. I honestly don't think Disney's losing out on a lot of money by having it be public domain now, because they can still make Winnie the Pooh and make their money, and Disney fans are going to be there to support it, and instead they'll boycott the things that are not Winnie the Pooh, like this franchise here. Now, there is something to be said about protecting a brand, and this is now free game. So it is possible that this horror film, let's pretend that it does incredibly well, and people are like now known. They see Winnie the Pooh as like this horror icon even, it becomes one. Like, that would just be kind of neat. Something like that could affect the image and
That
probably could hurt Disney.
I mean, I guess so. I've always wondered what that actually would do, because honestly, we live in a very cognitive dissonance ridden world where people can just kind of omit bits of information that aren't convenient. So like, is it really going to hurt Disney? Like, people are always talking like, oh, we can have more than one Superman, more than one Batman, more than one. Also, multiverses is at a prime nowadays. Like, honestly, to be honest, like, my opinion on that is no. I think it's bullcrap. I'm not. I try to reject the cognitive dissonance there and be like, no, there is a definitive thing, and that thing should be elevated, and
Mhm.
and then there's other things, you know. But like, if it were me, in my mind, as this horror icon Winnie grows, the other Winnie will probably shrink a little bit. But I think in general, most people don't really think that way unless it's convenient. Like, for instance, they might complain about it now since this news is out, but then once like an animated Disney Winnie the Pooh comes out, they'll forget about this and they'll just watch what they want to watch.
Exactly right. It's like non-news in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Let them make their Winnie the Poohs, and I hope that more little spin-offs like this come about in the future as other things kind of lose their domain.
One thing I wanted to add is, so maybe like an article you can add to the show notes or something like this, but it's really cool. It's from the DisneyClassic.com. It's well referenced and well sourced, but it talks about the 95-year history of the ownership of this intellectual IP and how Steven Schlesinger purchased it from A.A. Milne back in 1926 when it was created. Later on, Steven Schlesinger, which is like a publishing house or whatever, purchased it, also known as SSI. And then it looks like in 1961, Disney purchased the rights. They were paying Schlesinger Incorporated a royalty. And between 1961 and 1991, they stopped paying Shirley Schlesinger, her royalties. She filed a lawsuit, and Disney won the lawsuit. And then in 2001, they purchased outright Winnie the Pooh, and until now, it's now public domain again. So really interesting story. Disney, of course, pulling their old tricks, not paying creators what they're due. So definitely interesting article for you guys to check out.
And speaking of which, John DiMaggio tried to get a little bit more of what they're worth. Creators not getting paid what they should be getting paid at Fan Fusion. Futurama's John DiMaggio revealed that while he did not get the pay raise he wanted to return to the Disney-owned Hulu's Futurama, the fight was fulfilling. He called the respect he got from colleagues over his fight for higher pay, quote, quite rewarding, end quote, while adding that, quote, trying to get money out of Disney is like trying to get blood from a stone. You ain't gonna get it, end quote.
Or blood and honey from a stone. But
perfect.
Yeah, I added that in the notes. Like, I have to say that.
I saw, yeah. I'm glad. Have at it. Perfect. Many hope that the transparency between him and Disney will inspire other voice actors to fight for higher pay. Obviously, I think that is a huge problem in the industry. You and Scott have talked about it on your podcast too, Ronin Council, right? About how voice actors, unfortunately, the quality of voice acting is going down, at least in the English dub, because of the pay rate to these actors.
Yeah. Him and Scarlett Johansson need to team up.
Why do you say that?
Well, because remember, she had the whole thing with Disney, yeah. But she said something, well, I don't think she said something exactly similar, but she was like, I think she wanted to talk about pay, and like she wanted to open it up to where people, actors would get paid what they're due according to the contracts that they originally signed. And with streaming and all that, of course, wasn't a part of the original deal. And that's the reason why she was, speaking out against Disney in regards to Black Widow, I believe it was. So, yeah.
Do you think that DiMaggio made the right move here? And I didn't put it in the show notes, but the full interview is him and his agent were looking at it like, do we join Thanksgiving dinner along with the other actors that we've worked with for years and just accept the pay that they're going to give us? or do we stand outside and look through the window and not enjoy the meal, and also not get paid? And he decided that it's better to just join his old colleagues and work for what their agreement was instead.
Yeah.
He kind of said that while Disney had no room to budge on the deal, like, oh shit, if he's not on, the fans are going to be mad. John was like, well, this is all I have. What else happens? I can't push anymore other than I'm not going to be in it.
Well, I feel like the fans were kind of, from what I at least saw, were in his corner. Like if he chose not to sign up because they weren't paying him well enough, I think most of the fans would be on his side for the most part, at least from what I've seen. Of course, if he wasn't in it, they would have just replaced him with someone else. It probably would be far worse, but it would kind of be like a stain to the character, and maybe he feels like a certain amount of respect and kind of responsibility to the character to be the one to do it. So I really do understand. Honestly, it's a decision that I couldn't possibly make. And I think that whatever decision he ended up making is ultimately going to be the best one. Personally, I am not a big Futurama fan. I'm not like not a fan. I just never really got into it, watched it. I've seen little bits, I know Bender, of course, Bender's great. And I've seen the memes and stuff, and it's funny. So I do appreciate it for what it's worth. But, in general, like all I have is just, my good old classic contempt for Disney. But that only takes you so far. I really don't know what to do in the situation.
It was one of those things where thankfully the fans knew and were on his side, because it easily could have gone, if he were less loved, he's just being greedy. He just wants money.
Yeah.
He is not joining his other colleagues that are willing to play ball because he feels he's more important than the rest of them. And honestly, I think he is. I think he's probably the most famous actor out of all of these guys, probably the most sought after voice actor in the cast of Futurama, because he's done all kinds of things. He's done the Joker. He's done Jake in Adventure Time. His voice is absolutely iconic. So I think it is well within his rights to ask for more money and ask for higher pay. But thankfully the fans were like, yeah, you deserve it. What's funny is this whole thing was prompted by a fan at the convention saying, I'm glad you joined the cast and I'm glad that they're paying you. And he was like, no, they're not paying me what I wanted. This is what happened.
It kind of, we didn't actually add these to the notes. But it just kind of reminds me of another bit of news. Actually, I just now remembered, where Tom Cruise was saying that he didn't want to have Top Gun Maverick go straight to streaming, or I think I don't recall the exact article or what the context, but I believe what he said is he didn't want it to go straight to streaming, or it to have like a expedited streaming schedule either. He wanted it to have a full cinematic run. And actually a lot of people, from what I recall, like online, social media, etc., were kind of getting on Tom's case about that, which is really crazy, because Tom has done so much for cinema and big blockbusters, and he's done just such a great job. And I find it so strange that people, act like he's such a pretentious dinosaur who's holding us all back. It's like, if you want to watch Top Gun Maverick on your phone, you'll have the opportunity. Just wait the normal time. So
he was thankfully granted that time, because as we know, Chris Nolan wasn't, and that unfortunately dissolved. I think that was what dissolved ultimately the relationship between he and Warner Brothers, and now he's over at Universal.
Well, Paramount's doing well. Paramount's actually respectful of their of their artists. Yeah. So
yeah, they're great. And speaking of which, we're jumping around a little bit on the show notes, but Top Gun Maverick, it did pay off to hold off and wait, because it is officially the biggest Memorial Day weekend opening. The film has exceeded expectations and became the biggest opening in his career. Disney at first maintained that Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End was still the biggest Memorial Day weekend, with 153 million if preview night receipts are counted. But then Top Gun Maverick's total taking was updated to 156 million, opening there was no doubt at all that it is the new record holder. So Disney was going, stop the count. Stop the count. And
I wonder what that's like if you include inflation as well.
Well, that's a very, very specific detail that I chose not to include in here, because when it's convenient to me, just like it is for the MCU fans, then I will not include number of ticket sales because they want to talk about the MCU being the biggest movie of all time, Endgame topping out all this. It's like, yeah, let's talk about number of tickets sold. Same with the Pattinson fans, how they're talking about how it didn't hit 1 billion, but it made 800 something million. It's like, okay, how about you count for inflation and all of the DCEU Snyder's films? I think Man of Steel also included, you can count for inflation, and they topped the Pattinson movie. So yeah, again, when it's convenient to me, that's an game.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. No, I think Top Gun Maverick doing as well as it is, honestly, is still a great thing. I'm happy to see that this more kind of traditional blockbuster film and filmmaking get the praise that I believe that it deserves. You know, it's not just another superhero movie, another Kate movie. You know, it's a more. Yeah, it's funny because when I was watching the movie, I kept thinking to myself, like, this feels like a superhero movie, kind of,
really?
Like in a way. Well, I guess how can I put it? Like on a deep level, not just it feels like a modern superhero movie, but it's like these guys are flying around in these jets at like Mach 10, like they're flying around like Superman would, and they're like doing like missions, and it's like there's got a lot of stakes and intrigue. They're heroes, and there's like a lot of valor and whatnot involved in it. It feels kind of like a superhero movie in a way, but not. You can't say that nowadays. But do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like on a deep level, like the general framework of it.
When you describe it, yes, because if anyone else had said it feels like a superhero movie, I immediately would have thought negative. But if the way you're saying it now, of on a deeper level, the way the goes about in his journey from beginning to end, does that reflect a little bit of what we might have seen in something like Man of Steel or
and I don't want to spoil it, but there's a part where he's at a very clear disadvantage and he's fighting against someone who's a lot stronger than he is, and he's doing some things that are like, whoa, like how are you gonna stop that, and he pulls through and everything. I mean, it just feels, it was exciting and I loved it, and it was great regardless of what kind of movie it is. I'm happy that it's not a superhero movie and it's doing as well as it is.
Me too. And while one can argue that it's still an IP in a way because it's Top Gun, I don't think anyone expected it to do this well. I definitely did not, especially after all the delays. Everyone that I talked to about this, they were like, I thought that movie was out already. So I felt like this was not going to bring in the box office that even anyone was expecting. And Paramount was like, holy shit, like they were surprised by it. And I don't know how it captured everyone's, I think it was the older audience, right? That really came out to this film, fans of the first film.
Oh, big time, probably. Because I honestly haven't seen the first one. I want to see the first one now that I've seen the second. Yeah, it must be. It must be. I also wonder if any of the promotion ahead of time where, they were talking about how they actually put all the actors through the very rigorous training and how they actually used the actual jets. They were flying in the jets and it was all filmed completely practically. I wonder if that kind of thing gets people excited, because you have these people, and I don't know how genuine they actually are, who are complaining about how the water isn't real in Avatar and how it's all this CGI garbage. Of course, those same people watch Marvel movies gleefully, but let's just forget that and talk about the rhetoric we're hearing on, film Twitter, #film Twitter. They're talking about how, they're just some kind of like, VFX like game engine or something like that. And how it's like the fact that it's getting flaunted as much as it is a travesty, and there's no real filmmaking there. All this stuff that you hear. Maybe those people showed up to Top Gun Maverick. Probably not, but maybe.
Well, good for Tom Cruise, and we're gonna get a Top Gun 3. There's no way it doesn't happen now. It's gonna, unless you could spoil it, I guess. But he lives at the end, right? This isn't like the end of Maverick.
They're gonna make one called just Maverick. It's Maverick, and he dies at the end.
This will be the next Mission Impossible. That's what's crazy about it. He's got 3 more of those fucking things too.
What if they cross over with Mission Impossible?
Oh my God, yes. Tom Cruise cinematic universe. Well, let's talk about fandom a little bit here, because in an interview with The Independent, however you may feel about George R.R. Martin, he did reveal that he doesn't understand the appeal of being a part of a fandom that seems to hate the thing its members are fans of. So his quote here is, quote, "The Lord of the Rings of Power isn't even out yet. But if you follow what's going on online, the controversy about it is like World War II. They're dropping atomic bombs on each other. It used to be if you were a fan of Star Trek, you liked Star Trek. Now it seems like half the people who call themselves Star Trek fans hate Star Trek, and the Star Wars fans hate Star Wars, and the Tolkien fans hate Rings of Power," end quote. So I feel like there's something to be said about the generations of fans and those three particular things that he picked. But I want to hear what you think first about what George said and how he feels about fandom in 2022.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that as easy as it is to maybe blame the content itself, like, oh, modern content sucks and they hate their fans, and that's the reason why this is happening. I think that obviously there's a discussion to be had about that, and I'm certainly one to have that discussion. I'm not a massive proponent of modern retellings and modern updates on older stories, books, and things like that. So that's certainly not me. But even with that said, I would say that because fans are so closer tied together, the fandoms are closer linked and more familiar with themselves than perhaps at any time in the past they have been linked to the product. Like, for instance, if I bought a book and I'm reading the book at home and I'm really, really enjoying it, and then every once in a while I'll go to like my library and have like a book club with my fandom, then these are like special moments where I get to kind of update myself with the fandom, and that's kind of its own thing. But for the most part, my experience with the product, the book, the story is what's kind of sacred, right? But nowadays with social media and the internet and whatnot, we're so closely tied together that the majority, the bulk of our experience is actually the interaction with the product and not the product itself. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that whether you love something or you hate it, you're going to be more likely to feel that camaraderie and the appreciation for the whole experience based upon the people in your fandom. And since negative things tend to spread faster and are more sensational online, this all kind of comes together to end up looking like what we have now. So I think that, and then of course, the dynamics between modern storytellers and social expectations and all that, and the way that they treat fans and all of that, all come together into one very complex portrait.
Obviously, social media and what you were saying of everyone having immediate access to one another. Hey, did you see this thing? Yes, no, I hated it. I loved it. Why'd you hate it? Fuck you. All of that immediately within 5 minutes can happen, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's funny that the three things he chose, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Star Trek, are things that are celebrated by generations of fans. And I think that's one of the things, for example, with Star Wars. Yes, I do think that Disney is doing a terrible job with the IP. However, there are these different generations that love the first three movies, that love the prequel trilogy, and that love the current ones. And they all seem to be different generations of people. And same goes with the Lord of the Rings and now with Star Trek. There's just so many fans and so many different people that are going to be holding their expectations to that original thing or to the sequel thing, or they're just getting into Star Wars or Star Trek right now, that you're going to have a split in the fandom. That absolutely, I think, is inevitable with something as old as these three franchises. However, that process does happen a lot quicker now, thanks to what you were saying of immediately having access to, let's say they do a sequel to Avatar. Let's pretend that fandom gets completely split up. I think by movie 3, that could easily happen at a much faster rate. And it is because any little faults,
Yeah, I would say this though. I would say this. With Avatar is in the best position because you have the same filmmaker with the same studio making everything, right? So I would say that like it's one story thought out beginning to end by James Cameron and his crew. So it's not like it's been passed on, it's been sold, it's been handed over from studio to studio, it's been taken over by other CEOs who have different agendas and different, imperatives and whatnot, recreations, subversions, all this bull crap, It's none of that. It's one story. And yeah, it might take a while, but I ultimately think that people who are jumping on like now are just jumping into the middle of the story that or has already started. Whereas with Star Wars, while that would ideally be the case, it just wasn't because of, corporate politics and whatever.
Well, let's take it back to Star Wars even. If the original trilogy had released during this era, I mean, the fact that they changed directors already with the sequel, Empire Strikes Back, I mean, that itself would have been a huge problem, don't you think, in today's climate?
Well, it just depends on the narrative, really. Like MCU directors are just random directors they pull off the street. It's like no one cares.
That's
So
true.
it's it's like it just depends on what the narrative is. Yeah, I would say it just depends on what the narrative is.
I guess in conclusion, George's comments really only depend on what franchise or fandom he's talking about. I think as a whole, I do think he is wrong as far as like not wanting to join a fandom. And yeah, he has three great examples. However, and I know how different some people might feel, but I don't feel bad about being a part of, for example, the Snyderverse or being a part of the Bulbasaur fan club or anything like that.
Yeah.
I enjoy talking to the people that enjoy the same things that I do. So I think that George picked some very specific examples, and maybe he's speaking from a position of someone who gets constant. I'm assuming if he's plugged into social media or questions even in an interview, when's the next book coming out? When are you going to fucking finally finish that shit? And people are constantly hounding him for that. So he's like, fuck fandom. I think he's kind of over
Well,
it.
he sounds like someone who is plugged in enough to hate it, but not enough to see what the appeal is. And also, I would say that fandom is not necessarily something you have a choice to be a part of. It's all fandom is just like I have a social circle that's kind of built around a singular interest. And that happens anyway. Like so it's like, oh, I don't get the appeal of being a part of a fandom. It's like, well, there's it's not about appeal. It's not something you sign up for.
Mhm.
I mean, you can kind of, I guess, withdraw a little bit. You can choose to limit certain ways that you interact with your fandom or the particular actors within that fandom that you maybe aren't interested in interacting with. Maybe you can kind of cull that a little bit, but I think most people are just in a fandom. They appreciate it. They talk to people, and what's happened is their fandom, their social circle has expanded because now there are more people who are interested in this IP than there was before. So, it's more about like I don't get the appeal of staying in a fandom where most people hate it. It's kind of I think he's asking the wrong questions. I think he's pointing out the wrong things.
Mhm.
It's a very kind of like faux neutral stance. Like, oh, people hate everything nowadays. Blah, blah. It's like, well, that doesn't even halfway describe the problem. So I think he's full of hot air, in my opinion.
Sure, and you're absolutely right. It's a matter of you enjoy this thing, whether you don't get to choose if you like that thing. You either like it or you don't, and then from there you find other like-minded people. So that absolutely makes sense, and it's not a matter of. It definitely needs a deeper question of, well, what do you mean, George, by fandom? Like, how involved would you then get into it? It's kind of interesting, just how someone like him, who is the head of a Game of Thrones in a way, and a part of a huge moneymaker potentially, especially with the new show. So it's kind of interesting how what kind of a view he has on all of these things. And one
Mhm.
thing I am a big fan of is, well, I grew up with it, Speed Racer. And after making a big screen debut years ago, Speed Racer is heading to Apple TV Plus. So J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot is working on a live-action TV series based on the anime Speed Racer. And as Deadline reports, this TV project will not tie into the previous adaptation, and it will focus on the writers Hiram Martinez, who worked on Snowpiercer, and Ron Fitzgerald, who worked on Westworld. I don't have Apple TV Plus, but this may get me on there. I am still a little sad that it does not tie into it. But J.J.
Yeah.
Abrams, I mean, that kind of makes me nervous because he supposedly was doing DC projects that I wasn't going to see them, but he was supposedly doing those, and they're not happening now.
Yeah, it's funny because J.J. Abrams has not actually directed that many things. I used to have a pretty positive attitude about him because he did the Star Trek movies, which I thought were okay. I actually never saw the third one. I just didn't care to for whatever reason. I don't even remember why I didn't see it. I just never chose to watch it. And then he did that movie Super 8 as well, which I thought was pretty good. He did Cloverfield, and I think that's it. I think that's all the movies that he's actually directed, period. So he's really not like some crazy just star director. And the fact that he's gotten so much adulation recently, especially since the Star Trek movies are actually they did very well in the box office, but as far as the consensus on those movies, they're actually quite split, and there's a lot of middling opinions on those. So I don't really get to get all of his adulation. As far as this TV show is concerned, it doesn't get any of the excitement from the original movie because it's not based on it or even really adheres to it. So he's essentially starting from scratch. And it's locked in exclusively to the Apple TV ecosystem, which means it's going to prevent a lot of people from getting to watch it if they're just not interested in signing up for Apple TV. That also makes me think that the budget is probably going to be quite low. Also, since it's a TV show, it also plays into that as well, that the budget is going to be probably a little bit lower than it would be if it were a movie, which was one of the reasons why the original movie was great, was because of how great it looked. So, like, looking at it objectively, or as objectively as I can, I don't really see a lot of reasons to get hyped about this.
That's one of the problems with the sort of direction that we're seeing out of all this is we don't know what to expect. And I don't expect it to be something closer to the anime like the film did, of trying to make those crazy animated backgrounds. It was very loyal to the manga and the show. I've seen and read both of those. And we did get a little twist with Racer X, and that was really cool, and some costume changes. But for the most part, it looked directly like it was out of the anime. It was made by, I think both the Wachowskis worked on it. Yep. People that were fans of Speed Racer, and you can tell when you watched it. And I really don't know what to expect out of this particular version, and whether there's no way it's zanier than the theatrical one, because I don't think you can go even more over the top than that movie did. I think that went all in on trying to make it as much like the anime as possible, and it ended up paying off. Yes, it didn't do great in the box office. However, it's kind of gathered this cult following over the last couple of years of people discovering that movie for the first time or revisiting it after thinking, you know what, I don't think that they're going to do well with this, an anime adaptation. I don't think so. But then over the years, it aged well for a lot of people, including myself. And that's going to make people like me, I think, a little bit more skeptical about this show rather than excited about us getting more Speed Racer. In fact, I'd be more excited for an anime than I would another TV show.
Big time. Yeah, I think that's another issue with it too. It's that there was a lot of goodwill that the original movie, in my opinion, should have had because of how closely it adhered to the spirit of the original Speed Racer. And it did quite well with that. And I think over time, people started to realize that, right? Now we're going to get this TV show, which is very likely going to be a lower budget movie. And you just know it's not going to have that visceral, zany, feel that the movie has now become famed for. So it's going to feel like what a lot of people feel about the Halo series. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into that because that's a whole other subject, but people feel like the Halo series is like, just a sci-fi show with a Halo coated paint. And there may be some truth to that. Although I do like the show, I feel like that what they think that Halo is could very likely end up being what Speed Racer becomes, because we know what we want to see now, and now we have expectations that can be let down.
Right, I see what you're saying. So like a show, Speed Racer, a name, but it's actually something else. So I won't get my jumping Mach 5 or getting out of the fucking car and
like imagine it's just a racing show, right?
Yeah.
And you have like characters dressed up and they're riding around, and maybe the story is kind of similar, but of course they want to get into some of the character drama, whatever, which is fine with me. Honestly, I would watch it and be like just fine with it. But the movie set such a high bar, and it did a very well job. good job. Out of all of the anime adaptations, Hollywood adaptations, Speed Racer is well known as being one of the top, up there with Alita Battle Angel. Imagine they did a Alita Battle Angel TV series without Rosa Salazar, a different studio, different director, and it didn't have the budget that the movie did. Like, that would suck.
Yeah, now it's when you put it that way, it really does look like a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
Oh man. Now I'm worried. So we'll see as we get closer and we get a little bit of a clearer picture on what they're actually aiming for with this Speed Racer TV show. There's another record headline as the Pokemon Company released its annual earnings report for its 2021 fiscal year, which ended in February of this year, revealed that the company had one of its most profitable years of all time. So the Pokemon Company reported sales of $1.6 billion with a gross revenue of $700 million and a net profit of $325 million. Profits were driven by the releases of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Pokemon Legends Arceus, the Pokemon card game, of course, and Pokemon Go. That also answers the question as to why we're already getting another set of games this year. Well, when you have two games coming out on that year, 3 in this case with Arceus now, I think, if they're counting the sales for this year too, it leads to a record year for the Pokemon Company. And right now, it's a matter of striking while the fire's hot. Keep putting out that product.
I've never been, a massive Pokemon fan, which is funny because I'm really heavily invested in anime and all those sort of things like Japanese pop culture and whatnot. But no, it's great to see that Pokemon has been doing so well, even despite Nintendo. And I like how it's still spoken of as the Pokemon Company, and people really see Pokemon as its own thing, even though it is exclusive to Nintendo. It makes Nintendo feel as though they have to do whatever they can to keep them in their good graces. That way they don't jump to a different platform or whatever. I'm really excited to see they're doing well. As far as like the card games and whatnot, I haven't touched a Pokemon card in a million years. I know that you guys on the Discord channel do a lot of like the collecting and whatnot. Bobby does the collecting, right? Is it?
Yeah, Bobby's a huge collector.
Yeah.
Scott is big on video games. I'm sharing pretty often as well. And Treasure Hunting Sonic shares his Sonic stuff too.
Right. No, it's really good to see them, doing as well as they are.
Speaking as someone who works in the industry now, especially almost exclusively in the trading card game industry, I definitely can also testify that it hasn't really slowed down. Like, yes, it's not quite as rabid as during the pandemic or the shutdowns, at least, but it is still something that kids are coming in almost every other day. It's parents, hey, my kid's getting into Pokemon. So kids are watching Pokemon on Netflix. That's definitely where they're seeing it and going, okay, well, or my friend has cards. I've never seen those. Those are really cool. Where'd you get them? Now my kid wants Pokemon cards. What's the cheapest way that I can get them the most number of cards? Well, here's a booster pack. They're $3.99. The addiction begins. So all the kids are in. And then people in their 20s, 30s, the dude bros, they're coming in and they're buying singles. They're playing the game too. So the fan base is absolutely there. The fans my age they grew up with Pokemon in the 90s are also collecting some of these higher end cards. Someone today bought about $72 worth and it was 3 cards. So the value is still there for the collectors too. And it's all still rolling along pretty well. And I think that we're not going to get a slowdown of this Pokemon hype anytime soon anymore. I really do think that it's solidified itself as, at least for the next 5 years, as long as they keep releasing product and it's available, that people will be there to spend it. Something else coming back from the 90s is select seasons of Nickelodeon's Kenan and Kel. Also, all of that, they're going to head to Netflix on June 21st. I thought that was a little surprising since I would have figured that Paramount Plus would have been the place for Nickelodeon.
I don't know anything about Kenan and Kel. Should I? Should I know about that?
Were you not a Nickelodeon guy?
Probably not. I mean, Ren and Stimpy, SpongeBob, Avatar, The Last Airbender, Avatar: Legend of Korra, Cat Dog, Cow and Chicken. Was Hey Arnold also? Hey Arnold. So like that was kind of my era. I mean, I was probably more into Cartoon Network, I would say, especially as I started to grow older. I felt like I was more Cartoon Network. But
Well, you had Toonami on Cartoon Network. That makes sense.
yeah, well, the anime was a big part too, and just the other shows too. Like it was a Warner Brothers product, so the DC shows like Teen Titans and Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, were of course big parts of my childhood. So yeah, for sure. But no, Keenan and Kel. I don't remember anything about Keenan and Kel. Let me just Google it real quick here. But continue.
Yeah, I mean, did you ever see Big Burger or Good Burger? I'm sorry, Good Burger.
Something monsters, like the totally like real monsters or
Not
something.
real monsters. Yeah.
Yeah, not real monsters. Yeah. That was Nickelodeon too. I remember that. Keenan and Kel. Let's see here. Oh, is this some sort of like Nick and Night thing? Oh,
Yes.
yeah, these guys. Okay.
They were on All
Yeah.
That first, and then they got their spin-off show, which All That, to anyone that's over 40, was a kids version of SNL, like same fucking format. And then from there, those two were Kel Thompson and Keenan. I forgot his last name. I might have the last names mixed up, but they spun off into their own show called Keenan and Kel. They got their own film called Good Burger, which spun out of all that. And they're probably the two
So
biggest
many
names that
memes.
came out of it.
Yeah. No, yeah, I guess I never actually watched this show at all. I don't, not that I can remember, but I retroactively remember like memes and stuff.
It was on VRV as well up until that all changed. But yeah, the whole premise, I mean, I grew up with it, and I know we did the What's New on Netflix last week, but I wanted to put that in there because it seemed to have been like a last minute pickup or agreement between Nickelodeon and Netflix. So if you want to revisit some of the seasons, it's not going to be the full shows, so just a heads up on that. But if you want some of Keenan and Kel and all that, you can catch it on Netflix on June 21st.
That's actually interesting because it doesn't Nickelodeon have a deal with Paramount? Like for instance, SpongeBob is on Paramount Plus, right?
That's what I was saying. Like I thought that all of this stuff would have been, it was initially on VRV or Verve as some people call it.
Which is that's a Sony
I think
owned
so.
product.
Yeah, and all the Nicktoons were on there, and now I don't believe they're on there anymore. So I'm like, all right, then they're probably going to be on Paramount because that's where all the Nickelodeon films came out of, from what I remember. Rugrats, all of those.
Yeah.
So why aren't all of these on Paramount Plus? But it could be that same thing of like Warner Brothers Now or AT&T. Yes, it could be all on HBO Max exclusively, but you'll see stuff like Green Lantern show up on Netflix every now and again. I think they're just making extra money from Netflix in this case.
Right. It makes sense.
Speaking of streaming, what's new on HBO Max, the June 2022 highlights? So these are just the highlights of what's coming this month. If you want the full list, it is available on comicbook.com. But the first one on here is the very first Zack Snyder film I watched, and it is 300. It is worth a revisit. Where does this stand on your slate of Snyder films? Is it near the top or near the bottom?
Well, we've talked about this before, but I've never seen it.
Oh, you still haven't seen 300? Come on, man. Oh, man, you got to see that.
Dawn of the Dead and 300 are the two Snyder films that I've never seen. I've seen Snow Steam Iron. I've seen, of course, Sucker Punch. I've seen Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, Justice League. I've seen Watchmen. Let's see here. I watched the Ultimate version. Oh, big time Owls Cool. I love that. So yeah, I'm definitely in tune with most of the stuff. But 300, we could maybe have a whole discussion about that, like my feelings on 300. Honestly, I don't think I would be interested in watching the movie aside from the fact that I know it's Zack Snyder. It's one of those situations. Like, for instance, if any of those other movies, I watched the trailer and I read the synopsis, I'd probably watch the movie even if it wasn't Zack Snyder doing it. But with 300, I feel like I'd only be interested in watching it if it were Zack Snyder.
It's like, so I haven't, cool, though.
But that's the thing. It's too cool. It feels as though I've absorbed by osmosis all the coolness that movie has to offer through GIFs and videos and people talking about it. Like, if as cool as it is, could there possibly be any scrap of substance that I could get from 300 that I couldn't get by proxy?
I see what you're saying now. I present to you the soundtrack. You can't get that out of a GIF.
That's true. That's true. I'm sure one of these days I'll just do it, and it'll probably be pretty good. But I just feel like it hasn't been like a big incentive for me to do it. But
Fuck,
I'll
man.
let you know when I do. You'll be the first person I let know.
Well, as soon as you do, we're going to do a retrospective because now I want to talk about 300.
from a person with fresh eyes,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Another one on this list is Jerry Seinfeld's The Bee Movie. I was thrown for a loop. Have you ever seen this?
I have. This movie's dank, man.
It's crazy, right?
The movie's dank. It's been such a long time since I've seen it. I believe I saw this in theater when it came out, but I don't remember a lot of details from it. I've seen a lot of memes, so it clearly wasn't terribly memorable. But every once in a while, I'll see a GIF from it. Like, man, I can't believe that was actually a thing.
Well, the thing I most remember from it, and I didn't get a chance to finish it, but it was just last year that I watched, I think, 3/4 of it. Last time it hit Netflix or HBO Max, and I was like, this is a movie about a human and a bee falling in love. Like, this is fucking weird.
Yeah.
And they go serious about it. They treat it as an adult relationship. And I'm not talking about they have sex and they fuck, but I'm saying that they have these weird, like, mental I love yous, and it's really bizarre. It's almost like Jerry was like, no, they're just two people. It doesn't matter that it's a bee and a human. I got to finish it. It's just fascinating to watch because it's not what I expected as I was watching it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's so funny. Like, yeah, just going back far enough, and you're like, man, I can't believe that actually came out. Sometimes you don't appreciate things when they come out, but you look back, it's like, wow, that would never come out nowadays, or that was really weird. Like that hasn't happened since.
Speaking of weird, the Da Vinci Code is also hitting Netflix or HBO Max, and this is one that I was in high school when this came out, and this was like a big deal of Jesus had sex, he had offspring, and there's a lineage of Christ's blood in humans, and it was like this whole thing and the whole narrative and the whole novel. I remember seeing the movie and not finding it as interesting as the book, but do you remember how big this shit was back in the
well,
2000s?
there was a sequel to this, right?
Yes.
So yeah, these movies were, I think, really meant to be extremely provocative from that standpoint. I do remember a lot of backlash too from like, the more Christian conservatives and whatnot. So it really made a big deal about it. It was a whole thing, pop culture. And I never ended up actually watching any of these movies. I remember watching the trailer. Who was Tom Hanks in it? Or
yeah, Tom Hanks is the main guy.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's like kind of like the Passion of the Christ, like 2.0 kind of.
Yeah, as far as like how controversial it was. If you look at Da Vinci's painting, this symbolizes, it's almost like Snyder level things of like Zach's picture means this, and this symbol is the power, like the seahorse recently. That's a symbol of power.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you got out of the Da Vinci Code. It was really interesting. Like now I looked back on it years later and it's like, okay, then they're all reaching as far as like some of these symbols, but it was still really fun to think about like, what if, and it was kind of neat.
Yeah, like try to basically like it made conspiracies cool.
Yes, exactly. There's also a line of films from the 90s coming to HBO Max. I Know What You Did Last Summer. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. And I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer.
That's amazing.
And these are ones that I remember being huge as well. And I never saw one. I know the premise of the teens end up running over a guy and they were like, oh shit, fuck that. We're never going to tell anyone about this. And they bury him, but then he comes back like a year later or whatever and starts killing off the original teens.
Interesting. That's funny.
Also on HBO Max is The Mask from Jim Carrey, another comic book film, although very, very different from the source material. If you ever look at the original comics, he's kind of a psychopathic murderer rather than this Looney Tunes cartoon.
Yeah. No, I always knew that, actually. I always knew that while the original movie did quite well, the consensus is that it was good. I don't remember how much it made, but wouldn't it be interesting if something like this went to the public domain and we got to see a more realistic version of it?
Yeah. Something closer to the comic?
Yeah. Yeah. Or if just Warner Bros. Has got their crap together and just said, let's just do it right. That too. Although this is the thing, it might have to go to the public domain because it's like the Winnie the Pooh thing. Disney popularizes a certain version of what this character is, and now people feel entitled to it. And it takes someone crazy who doesn't, have like this sort of corporate, mentality to just take it because it's in the public domain and make it for what they want to.
Well, let me ask you something while we're on the mask. Obviously, you were saying that it is well remembered as one of Jim Carrey's.
I remember enjoying it a lot.
Yeah,
and I love Jim Carrey.
Well, I was going to ask you. So, what is your favorite Jim Carrey film?
Ace Ventura movies were good. The Mask was good. I'm trying. Dumb and Dumber. The whole Dumb and Dumber series is good. The movies that probably have like the most
Liar, Liar.
Like Liar, Liar. Yeah. Oh,
Truman Show.
Truman Show. What's the one? Bruce Almighty. There's just so many good ones. Even Spotless Mind was good.
Sunshine, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really hard to say. I would say like Ace Ventura has a special place in my childhood and my memory. So I'd probably say that, but I haven't watched a lot of his movies again, so I don't really have modern, like updated sensibilities on a lot of these.
Gotcha. That's a good pick. It's a popular one. It's probably going to go down when he passes away. I think Ace Ventura is probably going to be the thing that they put on there as one of his most remembered works.
Don't make me depressed, man.
Maybe Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't know.
I love those too. He's great.
Yeah, mine's The Cable Guy. Originally a Chris Farley film, but I think he nailed it. Like I was just remembering that movie. I was having shower thoughts, and I was remembering The Cable Guy and all the funny lines. Because at work they were talking about
Yes Man was good too. Yeah,
that one I never saw. I never saw that one. But they were talking about their favorite Jim Carrey lines. And I went with, it's just skin, Steven. It's just, I love that whole scene of him playing up this part of against his family. It's just so good. I love The Cable Guy. Mm-hmm. A couple more on this list. Total Recall as another, some consider it Arnold Schwarzenegger's best film. I still like, we were just talking about it on Discord, Terminator 2, but Total Recall is considered to be one of the most 80s Arnold one-liner type of films of all time.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen the movie. Once again, it's one of those movies that's like before my time, and and I wouldn't watch it unless I felt some sort of compelled to watch it. Like, like this movie like inspired so many movies after it, and like out of respect, I need to watch the movie. Like, it doesn't actually really interest me unless someone really pitches it. Or maybe someone like recreated. There's like these YouTube channels where they'll recreate trailers. They'll take the footage, they'll cut it together, they'll put new modern music and like cut it like a modern movie.
That's cool.
Those kinds of trailers get me excited to watch older movies or updated posters, updated like box covers and things like that. Because just when I see a bunch of old things, it just really just makes me think not cool, I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested in that.
Last one on this list here is Watchmen, which you had just mentioned. So you get two pretty big Zack Snyder additions to HBO Max, along with the rest of the DC Snyderverse, of course. But Watchmen being another controversial one, at least for comic fans, because of the changed ending from the graphic novel. It's considered, we've talked about it before, it was considered the unfilmable graphic novel, and it's one that Zack and crew ended up nailing because it's like, holy shit, they did it. They filmed Watchmen and it works.
Yeah, what's funny is that I don't think that Watchmen is actually controversial, really, because I think it just depends on what framework you're talking about. Because oftentimes there's in my neighborhood, there's like this game place where they play like Magic the Gathering and board games and card games and whatnot. And I was talking to my neighbor who goes there often. He frequents the place so much that he's almost like a kind of like a staff member almost, about just movies and whatnot. We got into Zack Snyder and we talked about his Superman trilogy, and when he was talking about those movies, he said that he kind of liked them. They were okay. He had some complaints about them. Most of the complaints are what you'd expect, that they were darker, like Batman vs Superman, and it shouldn't have been that, whatever. But the point is, after that, he said that he really enjoyed Watchmen. And the thing is that is not totally Well, that's definitely anecdotal, but I've had that experience many times where, in the framework of talking about Zack Snyder, what Zack Snyder films do you like? Most people will say they like Watchmen. But then when talking about all comic book movies, Watchmen oftentimes gets looked at as a negative because of the accuracy. But when they talk about Zack Snyder movies, they think Watchmen's the
Mhm.
best one. So I guess it kind of is controversial, but most people seem to like it from that I've talked to.
They definitely do now, but I remember that being maybe it's because I was working in the comic book industry of people wanting to see the giant squid at the end of the film, and instead you got that change to Doctor Manhattan, and I think it was a. I'm sure he's talked about it before, but I think it was more of a. It made more sense story wise, and not to say that Alan Moore is a lesser storyteller than Zach and the screenwriters or anyone else that may have helped him out, but it just worked better as a film in this case of making Dr. Manhattan. It's still the same plot of he's still the villain in a way, quote unquote villain of the film. At least that's how they paint the picture to the rest of the world by the time you get to the end of the graphic novel or the film. But I think you are right. Every time you see a best of Zack Snyder, now Watchmen is seen as such a good comic book movie, and many say that it was much like the rest of his work, just ahead of the time, too ahead of the
Right.
time. Because if it had come out now, it would have been in line with a lot of what people enjoy, like Invincible.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that in a lot of ways, Watchmen and other movies like V for Vendetta, there's another one, I think Kick Ass might be one, kind of pioneered a certain kind of tone and grit to like movies that now has taken on a more humorous note. Like Kick Ass obviously is as a kind of a comedy in some ways, but like nowadays when you see movies that are kind of like dark and very like dirty and great, kind of urban and realistic, like Watchmen is, or V for Vendetta, things like that. Now, when you see movies like that, they're the Suicide Squad or Deadpool or whatever, where they have the same kind of tone, kind of sort of. And is there everything's kind of like very like handmade and urban and dirty and whatnot, but it's a lot more centered around swearing and vulgarity and fart jokes and scatological stuff.
I love that the opening to the scene to the movie, which is an amazing. You see like Bruce Wayne being saved by the comedian, I think, or someone, and Warner Brothers did not want him to film that because of budgetary reasons, and he filmed it anyway and included it in there. It's like even back then, Zach was like, "Fuck that! It's going in. We're doing it."
Yeah. No, I always liked how edgy that Snyder was. I mean, like he like, no, I want to do it my way. I'm gonna fight for it. I'm gonna do things that might get people upset, but I'm just gonna do it. And I think that he's really calmed down, as a lot of filmmakers do. Like Tarantino also, I think, his quote unquote calmed down. And I still enjoy his movies,
Mhm.
but I think that eventually, just like all filmmakers, he's gonna settle into a different kind of filmmaker than he was before. And I think it'll be up to all of us to decide if we still think that his movies are as good as they were at one time, or if you like the new movies that he's making. But that's a discussion for a different day.
I do want to ask you another thing since we do have a little bit of extra time. In the first Man of Steel, this is going to be conspiracy theory, so Da Vinci Code stuff here.
Okay.
There's an Easter egg to Dr. Manhattan, from what I remember, of when they're looking at this space from the space cameras of there's supposedly a reference to Dr. Manhattan in Man of Steel, as if that there's a sign of Dr. Manhattan
Mm.
existing in that universe. This was before Jeff Johns wrote Doomsday Clock, which was eventually the crossover between the DC universe and the Watchmen universe.
Yeah.
Now, we do know that there's a lot of copying happening between that it did happen between
Sure.
the MCU and the DCEU. Do you think it's possible that it was Zack's idea first to cross over the DC universe with Watchmen, possibly that being his plans for future Justice League films?
Yeah. I mean, this is my take on it now. There was a time where I was very invested in that, and I got like really riled up and angry every time I thought of the possibility that his ideas are being passed around and basically claimed before he would ever get to bring them into fruition. Is it possible? Certainly it is possible. At this point, I don't I don't care really that much. I mean, you know, I don't know what's going through Zach's head. Zach doesn't ever tell us anything until it happens. And even then, it always feels like there's like a million things we don't know about how he comes up with his ideas, what his plans were. He always reveals them in little breadcrumbs through social media posts or interviews at SnyderCon or whatever. We have to all piece it together, do our little Snyder detective thing. So I feel like I'm never gonna have full enlightenment and clarity when it comes to who Zack Snyder is and what his true plans are and how much involvement he has in all this. So if he's not gonna fully open up with all that, I'm not gonna entertain the idea that there are things that could have happened that were stolen. Like who knows? Like, so
I kind of wondered. Okay, so you're saying it's possible, and okay, I got you. Because
I hate Jeff Johns.
Sure.
Like as far as his involvement. I mean, I liked Blackest Night. I liked Flashpoint.
Mhm.
I enjoyed some of his stuff, but I think most of his stuff is not that great, and I don't like his involvement in the movies. I think that there's absolutely some conspiracy happening at the top levels, if you can call it conspiracy. James Gunn, Feige. I mean, they admitted that they're cross pollinating. The question is, do you think it should happen or do you not think it should happen is the real question. And a lot of people think that it should. So that's my opinion on that situation. I think Zach would love to do something like that, but with the kind of control that Warner Bros. Wants to have over everything, it probably would never have come to fruition. Who knows?
Gotcha. And I'm going to push a little bit more since you said you hate Jeff Johns, and I can absolutely understand and see why. And now, I think a lot of us on this fandom can agree with a lot of that.
His TV stuff is garbage too.
Yes, it is. Now, you mentioned you like Flashpoint. I like Flashpoint too. And a lot of people still want to see Jeffrey Dean Morgan don the Batman suit. I've kind of been like, I almost don't want that because I know that's Jeff would be contributing, or he'd be benefiting a lot from a Flashpoint film. As cool as it would be to see Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Batman, where would you sit on that? Because I know you're like, I don't care if it happens anymore at this point, sort of thing. But as a fan of Flashpoint, is that something that you would ever entertain watching if it were to happen, if some kind of restoration were to occur?
Well, because see, like my dislike for Jeff Johns only goes as deep as his involvement in the DC universe, cinematic and TV. I don't have opinions about him as a person. My opinion about people in Hollywood is that they're probably all trash. And if they say less, they're probably still trash. They're just more quiet about it. And I prefer that. Mm-hmm. Zack Snyder, I like him so much that I'm biased toward him, and he's probably a saint, But so I just kind of like whatever. I'm not going to try to like moralize every person and make them into like some sort of, angel or devil or whatever based upon my opinion. James Gunn, I think he wrote some things that I really enjoyed. He wrote this movie called The Belko Experiment. I actually recently purchased it, and it's a really good movie. The Scooby-Doo movie was weird, but it was pretty enjoyable, and I can't take that back. I always liked that movie. Well, I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but I'm just kind of basically explaining Guardians of the Galaxy was okay. I'm explaining my feelings on these people. Like, I just don't like his name or his thought contaminating the DC universe as I once knew it. But at this point, the DC universe is so beyond saving, in my very cynical opinion, that like he could leave. They can put in, Zaslav Jr. in his place, and it's not going to fix the problem. I don't trust Zaslav. I don't trust any of these people. So to answer your question, yeah, I would like to see it. I liked Flashpoint. I don't care if he benefits from it. It doesn't matter as long as he's not contributing to it.
Gotcha. Which is almost impossible, right? Because I feel like they'd have to have him on for something, some kind of consulting or whatever.
Yeah,
he'd have his hands in it in some way. Yeah. Okay, I just thought that was interesting. I kind of wanted to hear what you would.
I got a little heated there.
No, I like it. That's what we need.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. You're listening to The Reasons I'm Broke.
Well, there you go. That is the highlights for HBO Max. Let's head into the final portion of today's episode. It is the Brokehead Block, what Millennial Mike and I have been doing since you last heard us. So, Millennial Mike, what has been going on your side? What have you been watching, playing, reading? What have you been enjoying since you last were on?
So I always need to think about these things in advance because whenever I'm on the spot, I can't think of it. Fortunately, I wrote down the notes, or you wrote down the notes rather, Stranger Things, which is definitely something I wanted to talk about. I really don't want to get into like deep spoilers because anyone who's watching the show, I want them to watch the show. It's funny, I was having a discussion with one of my good friends on Twitter. Let me see what his Twitter handle is. Xander Zone. And he is kind of very salty about Stranger Things season 3 because it was terrible. I mean, it was the cringiest 80s nostalgia bait, Saturday morning cartoon, Burger King Kids Club garbage that you could possibly imagine. They completely desecrated the season 3. It's so disgusting that I totally understand anyone who would leave the show or wouldn't even consider it because of how cringy that never-ending story montage was. I mean, I just shudder to think of it. Having all that said, season 4 is actually quite redemptive. It brings it back to kind of the tone of season 1. I honestly think if I could kind of map the entire show, I would say that season 1 was really great because of how new, interesting it was. I mean, it was a real vibe. It had those 80s kind of aesthetics to it, but it didn't feel as though it was overtly playing to, it wasn't like fan service. It felt like very natural. Like this is just a period piece in the most realistic way that any modern 80s period piece can be, not like the crappy corporate garbage that we get from Wonder Woman 84 and all this other trash nowadays, which is ultimately what season 3 turned into. And then season 2 came out and it was basically kind of just like season 1.5. It was just a continuation. Season 3 was a complete anomaly and an abomination. And then 4 came out and it brings it back to kind of where it came from. It is even more kind of like visceral and brutal in a lot of ways. It brings the horror levels up a lot. They basically, I mean, a lot of people, I think it's pretty fair to say that it's a TV-14 show, but they pushed it. Like, how streaming gets sometimes, especially on Netflix. It's like it really probably could be TVMA. I don't know any parent who would let their kids watch this show. Well, especially in season 4, if it was TVMA, but it's just not. So it's kind of one of those situations, which is like actually really pleasantly surprising. And I think a lot of the people who saw season 3 and were like, "This is so cringe," would never believe what they've done in season 4. The suspense and like the gore and the drama and the horror and everything like that. Yeah, it's been going quite well. The show is not really well known for being like a very character driven piece necessarily. Like the characters are very endearing, but that's pretty much it. They don't have a lot of depth to them, and you're not really like focused on so much how the characters are changing or whatnot internally, but more just how their relationships are changing. And in that way, it's very like CW, like it's like very like, there's like romances and things like that in there that kind of keep people interested from episode to episode, which is pretty cheap for the most part. But the aesthetic is really what most people jump into the show for. The vibe, the music is amazing and whatnot. So the season 4 is going to be split up into 2 parts. The first part, 7 episodes. The second part is, I don't know how many episodes, but it's probably going to be like 7 or whatnot. And it's going to be season 4 of volume 1, season 4 of volume 2. I think this is the last season. I think they're going to end it after the season. And it would make sense because they might have one more season now. I think they said they wanted to go 5 seasons, but they could. I'm not sure if the volume 4 part 2 counts as a 5th season, because it would if you go based upon the episode count from the last seasons. Yeah, things are coming to quite a climactic end, and I think that there's going to be a lot of trending going on if some things transpire that I think might transpire. So, yeah, definitely interesting. I have a lot of negative things to say about the show, too, mostly in regards to, and this is not totally a spoiler, but I actually posted a meme on this on Twitter, on Vero, Discord, other places like that. But this show really has a hard time. Well, it just refuses altogether to kill its if you're a character from the last season, you've survived. You're immortal. You have like series regular plot armor. But if you're a new character who gets a disproportionate amount of attention in the current season, right? You're pretty much 100% going to die by the end of the season. Like you've just been created literally as a way to get killed, to add like some little emotion, but they won't even touch. And they always act as though the characters from, of course, previous seasons are in trouble, because that's how they want to like play with the audience's emotions with the characters that they know the best. But time and time again, they show that they aren't willing to put them in any real danger. They do that again in season 4 in ways I won't go specifically into for fear of, spoiling it. But that's kind of an annoying element. There's a bunch of other elements too. This is not necessarily a review, just kind of my general thoughts. But even having all that said, I definitely think that it's worth checking out. Knowing what you know about season 3, power through it, like leave it on in the background, do whatever you have to do. When you get to the never ending story, just skip it completely for your own sanity. And then get into season 4 and just profit.
Well, it sounds like it's back to a return to form for Stranger Things then, and it makes sense that you're saying it might be the last season or maybe one more after, because I had read that these episodes for Netflix were more expensive to produce than
they looked
Game
amazing.
of Thrones. And that was an expensive show. So I was like, holy shit, Netflix is spending a ton of money on Stranger Things. And now it's like, all right, well, it's almost ending. So that makes sense. And now, especially with the state of Netflix on the subscription and all the negative press it's been getting, people rooting against it, I can kind of see where they'd want to try to save a little bit of money and maybe not spend quite as much on another show of this size.
Very interesting. One more thing I want to add is that not too long ago, I remember reading an article. It was actually soon. So remember the whole 13 Reasons Why controversy?
Vaguely, if you want to refresh me on it.
Well, long story short, 13 Reasons Why is a book about a girl who commits suicide. Okay. And it's like, and she basically, was it letters? I forgot exactly. It was tapes. She recorded these tapes with 13 reasons why she committed suicide. And each episode, there's 13 episodes, is a reason why she did it. And at the end of the book, they explain what she did. And at the end of the series, they show her killing herself in graphic detail. And it obviously got controversy. Although I think that it was completely, like they should have done what they done, because the story is about that, and handling it as seriously and as realistically as they did does more to shock and scare you than it does to, anyway, that's the kind of the gist of the controversy, right? Well, soon after that, Netflix got, Netflix has always been involved in controversies. It's funny. And a little bit later on after that, they said, oh yeah, we're going to cut the suicide scene out of it. So they cut it out. So if you go back now, when you watch it, you'll get to the part where the mother comes home and finds her in the bathtub, but you won't see the act, right? I bought the DVDs. But anyway, that's beside the point. Then later on, they announced that they were going to cut down on the amount of smoking in season 3. I believe it was season 3 of Stranger Things, right? I didn't recall any smoking in there. Not that because Hopper particularly smoked a lot. He was like this kind of grizzled army vet, Vietnam vet turned police officer. He smoked a lot. And of course, during the 80s, people smoked a lot as well. So that was kind of a part of the fabric of the show. And they said, oh yeah, we're going to reduce that. And that kind of great. Netflix is getting into censorship now. And I was really pissed. That was during the period of time in my life where I was extra hard on Netflix. You remember that? Do you remember I was like, I really just hated Netflix's guts. Now I'm like, I'm just so whatever. I can't do anything. And I just want to watch this. And I've kind of lost some of my fervor. But so that happened, right? So in season 4, right, there's all sorts of smoking. I mean, they're ripping bongs and they're smoking all the time. And it's darker and there's violence and there's everything in there. It's so it's kind of funny how things have changed.
Well, hopefully it maintains, honestly. Hopefully it does. I don't know. It's kind of a scary time for Netflix, unfortunately.
Release the bong cut.
That's good. I'm glad you've been enjoying Stranger Things and that it sounds like it is going back to what you did enjoy about the show and that you did come back for season 4 and that season 3 wasn't enough to deter you from returning to the show. Has there been anything else that you've highlighted or that you've been doing as far as maybe even with the Ronin Council or some other anime you've been liking?
Man, so Ronin Council has been doing pretty well. For anyone who, on this podcast who listens to the Ronin Council, the last episode was a 2-part episode, each part 4 hours. So an 8-hour podcast. So if you got through that whole episode, props to you. We're probably going to keep it a little bit shorter going forward. What happened basically was we kind of skipped an episode. So we had all this extra news. So we had an entire podcast dedicated to news. And there also happened to be a lot of shows that we were watching as well. This season, there's a lot of shows too. I have to say though, like last season, there wasn't a lot of things that people were really excited about. It seemed as though people kind of weren't expecting a lot from it. But then after it actually came out, there were a lot of things that I really enjoyed, that more so than I thought. Expectations were low, but the actual season I think was really strong. And this season, there's a lot more shows that people are especially excited about. Like one's called Spy X Family, which is a really popular manga that got transferred into a anime. It's been getting massively huge, but I don't like it that much. And there's a lot of other shows that I just really don't care about that much. They're just really not that great. So the expectations are very high this season, and I have a ton of shows on my watch list, but I'm probably going to drop some of these shows because I'm really just not having a lot of fun watching a lot of these shows. And I don't want to do next episode podcast and be like, hey guys, what do you think about this? And we have just dumb, disingenuous conversation about shows I really didn't care about. So it's going to probably be a lot smaller this season. As far as particular shows, it's not necessarily my favorite. It might be my favorite show actually this season. It's called Summertime Render. It's only on Disney Plus.
Wow.
It's funny because I was criticizing Disney for getting into anime, because there was this article that released on Anime News Network and they were talking about how they were trying to get into anime. And I was, of course, naturally going to be, kind of like skeptical and be like, well, any anime that's on Disney is going to be garbage, And this show called Summertime Render is great. You wouldn't think that it's a Disney exclusive show. There's no censorship. It's just an anime as you expect it to be. And it's a really interesting kind of mystery story, kind of in the way of Re:Zero, that show that I was telling you definitely not to watch, but without the elements of Re:Zero that I don't like. So you should probably check this out if you can watch it, the Johnny Depp way.
Wow. Yeah, I never would have. So is it made in the US or is it Japanese and then they published it?
Yeah, it's just published by Disney.
Okay.
Of course, that still doesn't mean that you shouldn't be concerned. Disney, if there any money or involvement in a project, there's a chance that they might want to manage the way that their brand is represented by whatever is on their their platform. But with this, I don't feel like there was really anything. I mean, most people probably aren't watching this show. It's like there's like 2, maybe 3 shows you could possibly consider anime on Disney, and this is one of them. So no one's like signing up in droves to Disney Plus to watch anime. This is something that you watch if you happen to have it. And this is definitely not a show that you're letting your kids watch. I mean, not even close.
Really? So it's still kind of mature?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's definitely not a kid for show for kids. That kind of makes me wonder, is it because it's an anime that allowed them to kind of skirt some of the rules? I'm kind of really interested in finding out how far Disney's willing to go to uphold their brand, and in what circumstances will they allow things to slide, and are they willing to change going in the future? Have they changed? Like, these are things that I really want to have an open and honest kind of, discussion about one of these days, because I mean, I don't like them. And I still think that they're on average worse for everything, but I have to be honest and say, well, they allowed this to happen. And there's definitely situations with outright censorship, like with Falcon and Winter Soldier. Do you remember that?
Yeah, with the dead body or whatever.
Yeah, with the censorship and whatnot. So I really want to know, like, okay, what's the whole story with that? So, but yeah, Summertime Render. If you have Disney Plus, watch it. If you don't, watch it.
I'm still surprised it's not on Hulu instead. Like, that kind of shocked me because there is anime on Hulu.
Right. There's a ton. Well, that's because Hulu and Funimation for the longest time had a licensing deal, a cross licensing deal. So all the Funimation shows would be on Hulu, in addition to a few Hulu exclusive licensed shows. I don't know how that works now. A lot of the shows that were on Funimation are still on Funimation even after Sony purchased Crunchyroll and they combined it together. So they're probably still just licensing it from Sony like they were before. But yeah, this is a Disney Plus exclusive.
Gotcha. A recommended Disney Plus exclusive from Millennial Mike this week. That's insane. That is a Stranger Thing right there.
I don't know. Am I changing or is the world just getting crazier?
Well, I'm about to start getting into manga because I'm thinking of getting the Viz app for $2 or whatever. Over the weirdest thing, I want to read the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, but only the first arc where it's not about the card game. It's about him sending other teens to the Shadow Realm and setting people on fire, apparently.
Exercising them.
Yeah. So I'm like, I want to read it for that, but now I'm afraid that might be like a black hole of like, okay, now I want to read this manga that I never read and this other one and over here and kind of fall into that trap. Is Viz the best way to go about this, or would you recommend a different way of reading manga?
Well, Viz has a ton of licensed manga that you can only read from them. Manga Plus is another great place to read free manga. And what they'll do is they'll license manga, and even if it's way ahead of where they are on the app, they'll release it like on a monthly or like a weekly basis or whatever in like little bits. So you can read some and then you have to wait. You can read some and you wait. And that's a great way to do it because even if it's new or if it's old, you don't feel like you have a ton to read. Typically manga is pretty quick. Like every chapter is just a few minutes to go through, 10 minutes or less most of the time. So you're never really going to fall into a black hole. And I think, especially with manga for me, like there's only certain mangas that I really want to read. I feel like I'm more picky with manga than I am with anime because I feel like when you're reading it, there's more attention required. And I don't know how it is for you, but for me, so it's something that I really have to feel like I'm investing in a lot more. It's not something I can just flip on and just watch. So I don't think that time sinks are going to be a concern when it comes to manga. So, but yeah, definitely download the Manga Plus app because it's free. And then if you want to pay for Viz to get content that's not on the Manga Plus app, then, that certainly wouldn't hurt either.
Okay, so the Manga Plus app is something separate from Viz altogether?
Yeah, Manga Plus is... Because actually, Scott kind of got me onto Manga Plus. So it's by Shueisha. I think they're kind of a licensing company. So they
sounds Johnny Deppish.
Shueisha?
Yeah, are they official? Like, I've never heard of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Manga Plus is official. It's all licensed content, and they release it like on a scheduled drip. So you're not getting usually the most up to date, manga. You're getting it, and like they'll license old stuff. So like their catalog is not as massive as maybe some unofficial places you can go to read manga because it's only based upon what they have licensed. Mm-hmm. But if you see something on there that you want to read, then it's an official way to support manga that you're interested in. We did actually a segment on this in the podcast where Manga Plus was a way that they are tracking the interest of manga globally, overseas. It gives them kind of the ability to see like what's interesting and give them the ability to kind of react on how they want to release manga and how they want to make manga. So I believe Shueisha is actually affiliated with Jump.
Oh, okay. Well, that's smart regardless. Good way to track what people are reading, what their interests are, because they're not always sales can only tell you so much. And I get it. That's going to be how people vote with their dollar, but you can actually get a lot of information from things like that service you're talking about, Manga Plus. All right. I'll give that a shot first before I go into Viz, and maybe I'll check Yu-Gi-Oh! That's going to be the first thing I check though. If it's not on there.
Well, I think it's Jump. Like, because they have like Naruto, Dragon Ball, One Piece. So I believe, Shueisha Manga Plus is a Jump licensing company. So I don't know if Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Jump. I don't think it is.
But that's the only thing that I've been kind of playing around with. Kelly and I have been watching Halo. We're on episode 6 now. Been thoroughly enjoying it. And I've been hearing, of course, the same criticism, exactly the same thing you've been saying of people saying, well, if you like the Halo games, you probably won't like the show, but if you just want a good sci-fi show, then you'll like the show. And Maceo and I talked about it last week on how people that have never played Halo seem to like the show. These are older audiences, and it's working out for them.
Well, I'm not that old yet, but I never played the original Halo games. From what I can pick up from the consensus of people who talk about Halo, that 1 through 3 were really good. They released some Halo games after 1 through 3 that weren't good, and there was a kind of a drought, if you will. And then Halo Infinite has been kind of returned to form, where people are really getting back into Halo, is what it sounds like. I haven't played the campaign mode on Halo Infinite, so I don't know what it's like from the standpoint of like a story driven kind of first person shooter game. From what I understand from like cutscenes and videos that I watched from the original and just talking to people, Halo has never really been a very deep story driven game. I guess, some people will go in and read the books and they'll kind of get into some of this stuff, which I didn't even realize there were books, but apparently you can find them.
Yeah.
And they go deeper into the lore or whatever. But it's like, honestly, I feel like people who read Halo books are probably even more of a fringe minority than people who read like Star Wars extended universe stuff. So I really don't know how much of their opinions are really actually influencing. I think people in general want, like, for instance, if a Metroid game came out, I'm sure they would want the same exact thing out of Samus led Metroid game that they want out of a Halo game. A really cool, stoic, doesn't talk because they're a first person shooter protagonist character, a badass who, kicks butt and chews gum and they're all out of gum, that kind of situation. High budget, just first person shooter, really high, live action cutscene essentially. That's what I imagine people would really want out of any game like that. So I don't really see like people saying that, oh, this isn't really Halo. It's like, well, what makes Halo aside from the gameplay mechanics?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, and I know it's going to be a little bit of a repeat, but you're confirming what Maceo said last week. Of like, you go. He was like, you tell if fans go, just take the first game and make it into a show. And he was saying, well, that's not going to work. There's not much to the first game as far as plot and character development that you can make a whole show out of. Like, it would be a terrible show if it was just a first person thing of him running around and kicking ass. Like, it just doesn't work.
And some people will say, well, then don't make a show. But this is the thing, though. It's funny because typically people will say, if you take something that has a lot of story and then you don't do the story thing, then you're ruining something, right? You're taking away from it. You're twisting it. But if you take something that doesn't have a lot of story and you add story to something, then you're improving it. That's typically been an argument that a lot of people who are very critical of Hollywood adaptations usually use as a way to kind of like say, hey, this had a great story. You could have like made a new thing, or could have taken a story that or a property that isn't deep in story and you fill the gaps in to enhance it, right? Well, for some reason with Halo fans, they take this first person shooter franchise with very little story and somehow keep it that way or just leave it alone. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. I'm very sympathetic to their critiques and their skepticism. I really am, but I just feel as though they're not being fair. I don't think. I don't think they're being fair at all.
Well, and regardless of how they feel, the show has been a success for Paramount Plus, and I think it is because it did do that thing that something like Cowboy Bebop failed to do, and it captured the general audience. It captured the general streaming customers that are on Paramount Plus. Paramount talked about how it was one of their most streamed shows or originals, and I know that they're doing they greenlit season 2 before season 1 came out, and that's like a tactic to help promote season 1.
Yeah.
But we're getting a season 2 out of it. And it seems like, for the most part, people stuck around for more than just episode 1. Even if I think that the gamers or the Halo fans that are really against this, they're not big enough to truly influence the success of this show. I think it's strong enough now to get us at least a few more seasons out of it for the service.
Yeah. Are you gonna do like a review of it once you're finished?
It'll depend on how some of the other hosts feel, and Kelly and I would definitely want to have Kelly on as well because
Mm.
she's really liking it, and I'm curious to see how it ends and how they wrap this up.
I have critiques. I'll definitely be like definitely in the middle when it comes to it. You and Kelly might be on like the more positive side, and then Jared, maybe Bobby might be like on the more negative side of it. I don't know. No, I really would like to delve into it. Like it's funny because when I heard that, I have a friend who is kind of negative about it, and then when the ending came, I was 2 episodes behind, and when the ending came, he said that he really liked it. Like, oh my god, the ending really tied everything together. It was great. I like the direction they're going, right? And for me, that scared me. That scared the piss out of me because I'm like, oh no, it's like this is gonna be like sequel trilogy episode 9 situation, or they're basically course correcting, like overcorrecting, trying to please the fans after the fact, despite what had already transpired. It's like, listen, I get that you didn't like it, but you can't do some disingenuous course correction to retroactively please the fans. So I'm really, really curious, what you guys think about it. I ultimately actually do agree that the ending was very clever. And I think that any fans who are actually still complaining, I'm really surprised because I think what they did with the ending is they gave the fans what they wanted in a way they weren't expecting. And I think it adds a lot to the story and kind of actually does what the fans expected too, all in one. So
So Samus shows up, is what you're saying. Is there a big crossover? No, don't spoil
it. Right? Yeah, it's actually it's a multiverse of helmet wearing, arm blasting.
Fucking knew it. Mandalorian.
Yeah, Mandalorian's the
show's ruined. Fuck Halo. Well, Mike, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for being on in this episode. And I know you've been talking about Ronin Console, but please let them know exactly what the podcast is about and where they can find it.
Yep. So at Ronin Council, we talk about anime, games, Japanese pop culture, all that kind of weeby stuff. Let's see here. Every month we have a new podcast usually around that time. Typically we'll have a opening season episode, a mid-season episode, and then a season end episode to kind of tell you what we're starting, where we're at, what we're dropping, and then what we finish and our final thoughts on everything. So you can kind of, catch us usually about once a month, give or take. You can find us on Twitter at Ronin Council. You can find all the content from the Exiles Network at the Exiles Net, which includes Ronin Council and other projects that I have when I have time to do them. You can find me, of course, on Discord, wherever you get Discord links and invitations from. You can find me on Vero at Millennial Mike. Funny little anecdote. I started a True Social account and I got followed by like 10,000 Trump bots. Not really.
Oh.
Not that many, but I mean like maybe 25 or 30 or something like that. I have to check. I haven't. It's a ghost town, but you can find me there at Velcro 16. So if you want to follow me on True Social.
I almost made an account out of like, I think you were saying, I'm going to promote the podcast on there is what you were talking about, right? You're going to put Ronin Console up there?
Well, what I did first was I made an account for myself, and I did actually, my first post was a snarky comment. Like I said, like, hey, I've been lying my entire life, but now I'm finally posting my first truth, So I made this like snarky comment like that. And then after that, I posted a link to my SoundCloud page as a way of promotion. I didn't get any likes, and there's no way to like look at your statistics and see like if anyone even interacted with it in any sort of way. So I don't know what the deal with that is, but the next time I do post, I will probably post there and see if anyone I mean, it's such a dead space that I feel like if I actually post, I'll be posting some of the most valuable content on the entire platform. So that might actually be a good thing for me, like Vero. Vero's a completely, but I have a bunch of people who kind of know me and followed me over from Twitter and other places. So that's the reason why there's any interaction there, but we'll have to see.
Awesome. Well, thank you. There will be links on everywhere you can find Millennial Mike and Ronin Console, also in the description of today's episode. Otherwise, if you want to help out this podcast, please leave us a review. And that includes any podcast that you enjoy, including Ronin Console. Leave a review on Stitcher, or on Apple Podcasts. If you're using another one of the third-party podcatchers out there that do have a rating system or a thumbs up, make sure to do that as well. I know for Apple Podcasts, it doesn't really help with the rankings or anything like that, but if anyone is on the fence on checking out or subscribing or following a podcast, that review may be the thing that pushes them over the edge to becoming a future Broquette Core member or future Ronin Console listener. So definitely leave us a review. It just takes a few minutes. Thank you once again for tuning in to this week's episode. You can find us at thereasonsimbroke.com. I've been Daniel, joined by Millennial Mike and Broquette Core. All will be well. Two manga that I should read after Yu-Gi-Oh! What would you recommend?
If I'm talking to you, that's a
Yes.
far more complex question that I could possibly get. I was not prepared for that. I mean, if you like Yu-Gi-Oh! And what was it, like Rave Master and stuff like that, then basically like any kind of anime that are similar to that, kind of like those Saturday morning cartoon animes, like, Pokemon, Digimon, Zatch Bell, like any sort of adaptations, like manga originals would probably be interesting to you. I would definitely check out, like, if you enjoy reading something more like adult and mature, I would say check out Bokurano, only not because it's a true recommendation. It's actually quite a disingenuous recommendation because I don't know if you'll like it at all, but it is probably my favorite manga ever. So I recommend it to everybody. Yeah, it's I can't really say even the description of the show really without spoiling it because it's kind of one of those shows, but it involves kids getting contracted to a robot to fight other robots to save the world. And obviously it sounds kind of similar to maybe other things you've heard of like Evangelion and whatnot, but it has a very unique existential twist to it that I think is quite good. It begins, middle, and ends. So it's not something that goes on forever. And I think it's really worth reading.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The title of it one more time.
It's Bokurano, Bokurano.
Bokurano. Thank you. I'm going to read that. I will. I promise.
You better.